My fiancé, best man, groomsmen, and I have known each other since we were kids. We collectively met between 6th and 7th grade and have been running around in the same friend group ever since. The group has grown and shrunk over the years, but a small core of us have remained extremely close. Recently, my fiancé's best man Jay has been making jokes when we're hanging out about the two of us dating that have now escalated. Admittedly, when I met Jay in 6th grade, I had the hugest crush on him, and everyone knew. I was much taller than average for a girl at that age, and he was one of 2 guys in the entire school as tall as me. That, though, is where the story ends. I had one hell of an awkward phase in middle school, and he was very clear from the start that he was not into it. Post-awkward phase, as friends and adults, it was something we constantly joked about, but never seriously. Since everything between us had always been platonic. This joke of me being rejected by him has now recently turned into how he dated me first, whenever Fiancé and I are around. Despite the inaccuracy and an increase of it being brought up, everything has remained pretty lighthearted in context, and while annoying, is something I have been able to brush off or quickly rebuttal. This escalated this weekend when 2 of Fiancé's groomsmen were over hanging out with Fiancé and I. The wedding was brought up, and after a concerning look between the two, they mentioned something had happened with Jay they thought we should know about. Apparently, Jay had been telling them stories he was considering for his best man speech, with the main one centering around how I had been shared around and had made my way through the entire friend group. While they kept what was explicitly said fairly vague out of respect for me, they were clear it crossed the line and insisted I had slept with the entirety of the group attending the wedding. They were very clear with Jay that he could not say anything like this in his speech toast. Jay responded with an "I know," stating that I had already made it clear my maid of honor would be proofreading all speeches prior to the wedding, so he wouldn't be able to get away with it anyway, but ended the conversation by saying something along the lines of, "But what if I could?" leaving the possibility open. Of all the groomsmen in the party, 6, including Jay, these 2 were the only ones in this core friend group, and the only ones I had any sort of history with that could potentially be notable. It was all prior to high school and very innocent. One I went on my first movie date with, where our parents had to drop each of us off because we couldn't drive and picked us up afterwards. The other was the classic first 6-month relationship in middle school, where it took 6 weeks to muster up enough courage to hug each other between classes in the hallway. Sure, we made out, and very middle school level things happened, but this is something we've all laughed about now for over a decade. I wasn't the only girl in this larger friend group, and throughout the years, this was something that happened pretty frequently. Because we grew up in a smaller area, overlap happened like this regularly in every group, and even more so as we went through high school. My fiancé is the only one I have seriously dated or had any sort of intimate relationship with of this friend group. We had an on-again, off-again relationship throughout high school that ended for a bit once I moved out of state for college, but we remained close friends and eventually reconnected when I moved back in 2019. We started dating in 2021 and got engaged in 2023. He's the only one in all of this I have ever slept with who has seen me unclothed, and so on, making this situation even more odd and off-putting. Jay and I have been close friends since high school. When Fiancé was in a toxic relationship that isolated him from Jay after I had left for college, Jay would reach out to me for advice on school, girls, relationships, and more. He had always been our #1 supporter, advocating for Fiancé and I to reconcile our relationship throughout college and into adulthood. He even took a bit of credit and would throw around an "I told you so" here and there when we eventually did reconnect. I'm not sure how to handle this. I could write an additional post about how frustrated, confused, wronged, and uncomfortable I feel, all of which I plan to discuss in more detail with Fiancé after sitting on the issue for a bit longer. We've all talked about it, recognizing the way Jay is framing things is wrong, but Fiancé and the groomsmen are able to brush it off in a way I feel like I can't. I don't know how to move forward from this or what to do next. Additional information. Fiancé and I aren't getting married until the end of next summer, so much of the conversations we had about toasts and speeches have been more theoretical, except that a few have asked for the opportunity to give a toast including best man. We have loosely put this information in save the dates, on the website, and other prints. Fiancé and best man have been best friends since kindergarten. They were neighbors and inseparable until they each went their own way for college. My fiancé's parents basically raised him alongside fiancé. Jay has strictly only ever expressed platonic feelings for me. Even when both single or alone together, we have only ever acted as friends towards each other after the embarrassing early middle school crush I had. Update: 2 days later, since posting, I have spoken in further detail to both my fiancé and one of the other groomsmen involved. I also confided in my maid of honor about the situation for an additional perspective outside of this specific friend group. After these conversations and reading through all comments on the original post, I've come to realize the significance of a few key details. Jay has a deep-rooted superiority complex. He always has, and it is something many in our friend group have become accustomed to. He has always been the type who seemed to believe he was the standout amongst his friends, whether that be through education, athletics, his career, or with women. Jaws has also always been a bit egocentric, and a lack of accountability or consequences for his actions has been growing for some time now. Despite it almost always being unintentional, he more often than not is oblivious to the inconveniences and harm he causes others, as long as it is beneficial to his personal ego. This is about jealousy from a few different angles, but not about me specifically. When looking at the full picture, this escalation feels like a continued attempt to knock my fiancé down for reaching that next stage in life. Whether that is because fiancé has reached it before him or has moved onward without him, I cannot say for sure. Jay has issues with misogyny that have also been escalating in tandem with everything else. His lack of respect for the women he has dated has also seemed to increase. Much of the personal tension he and I have had recently pertain to his perspective of women that have begun to veer into a more disrespectful realm, alluding to an increased belief that due to their gender alone, women are inferior. The good friend he was to me over the years, who was always kind and supportive, who never overstepped boundaries and was always there when needed, can exist in tandem with the above information. They are not mutually exclusive. Life happens and people grow, sometimes in opposite directions. I spoke in depth with one of the groomsmen to have further transparency of the situation and what was explicitly said. He acknowledged that the conversation initially centered around the excitement they had for the wedding, and Jay clearly stated he wanted to give Fiancé and I the best wedding and experience possible. The conversation evolved, and Jay mentioned looking for icebreakers for his speech, toast, and began bouncing a variety of distasteful jokes that focused more so on the expense of my fiancé than anything else. Then the idea was proposed about explicitly stating that my being passed around the friend group was how they all remained relatively close since middle school and high school. Jay was immediately shut down by the other groomsmen, told to know his audience, and also recognize he was openly alluding to things that were untrue and that could have an extremely negative impact on me personally. The conversation stopped shortly after this, and the groomsmen, without context of how this issue had been escalating, chalked it up to a one-off situation with Jay acting full of himself in the moment. Fiancé and I are the first of our cohort to get married and have a full-blown wedding with a ceremony and reception. These comments did not start escalating until after our engagement roughly 1 year ago, following Jay's breakup with his long-term girlfriend. Jay has never made comments like this to me or my fiancé privately, or when it is just the three of us together. Any scenario where this has been an issue has been in an environment which involved others, and mostly others that are not a part of this cohort from middle school. This solidified the above bullet points as the main factors to why Jay acted in this way, from my perspective. So, what next? As mentioned in my original post, I spoke with Fiancé in detail about the situation and how I was feeling. When all of this had been brought to our attention a few days prior, In an attempt to preserve myself in the moment, I brushed it off more so than I probably should have. I do not blame Fiance for not having any immediate or strong reaction in the moment, because I had avoided one myself. I think it's important to note that Jay is not a day-to-day character in our lives. While he travels frequently for work that brings him to our area, we live states apart. He has not lived in the same area as me or my fiance since high school. Much of this evolution with his personality has happened in the last few years as well. I recognize this is not an excuse for the lack of accountability on our part, but felt it added important context that this was not something that was observed and ignored daily, but one that has slowly been recognized over time, since we maybe see him 4 times a year at most. Fiance was extremely open in conversation, immediately brought up having a conversation with Jay, but admitted to not viewing this as anything more than Jay just being Jay, and that he was all talk. At this point, we had only discussed how Jay had continually escalated the situation and how uncomfortable I had now become from this. The lack of accountability Fiance had made for Jay's action definitely hurt. But then I recalled a commenter who had asked if I still considered Jay a friend because he actually was, or because that was how it has always been. To sum up what turned into a lengthier and much more productive conversation with Fiance, I told him that while I recognized his friendship with Jay was something that had always been a part of his life, I did not personally want to be friends with him anymore after this. I brought to Fiance's attention that while the scenario was explicitly about me and attacking the integrity and character of a 12-year-old girl, every action or usage of the scenario was used against him to invalidate his accomplishments of getting married or make him come off as less than. I told Fiance it was up to him on how he handles his conversation with Jay, but regardless, the disrespect Jay had shown me in this was a clear statement of what he thought of our own personal friendship. I firmly believe it is not my place to force how my fiance handles his own personal relationship with Jay in this. All of this was deeply taken to heart, and you could tell that Fiance had started coming to his own realizations as the conversation progressed. He recognized that if the roles were reversed, or if it had been any one of my bridesmaids slandering me in any way, he would be firmly advocating for me to reevaluate my friendship with them. Fiance asked for a few days to stomach the information himself and reflect on what he wants to say to Jay. He asked if it would be acceptable for him to bring up that I no longer wanted to be friends with Jay personally, and I said yes. I was clear that if Jay wanted to talk with me following their conversation as well, it would need to be the 3 of us and not a personal conversation. I am still evaluating how to approach the speeches toasts at our wedding. For now, I reserved the right with my fiance to omit Jay from giving a speech and having my fiance choose another groomsman to do so in his place, potentially canceling the speeches, toasts altogether, and if Jay is allowed to give a toast, telling the DJ to cut the mic if need be. All of which he agreed with. There is still plenty of time for the situation to develop and for potential future updates, but I wanted to again thank those that emphasized the seriousness of this issue, gave their honest input and advice on how to handle the situation, and provided perspective on what they believe should be done next. When originally posting, I was still in a state of shock, trying to accept the situation as it had unfolded. Your responses constructively pushed me into the reality of what was happening and what I was feeling. New update. 6 months later, I'm considering canceling our wedding and calling off our engagement over a pizza. Buckle up, because this is a long one. While the drama around my fiance's best man has simmered, the deeper issues surrounding a lack of support have not. Apologies in advance for this not being centered around my fiance's best man. Not much has honestly changed. A conversation between them was had, much of which was my fiance assuring him that things would blow over and accommodating Jay's stresses that it was only a joke. While my fiance acknowledged what was said was wrong, the conversation wasn't to set boundaries. I eventually had to have my own conversation with Jay that my fiance stood silently in the room for. I reached my breaking point 2 weeks ago. Following everything with his best man and a few other challenges we'd been facing, I tried putting my best foot forward these past 6 months. I sought out therapy to address the lack of support and anxiety I was feeling, and have made intentional efforts to work on our relationship to ensure we were in a stronger place before committing to each other. In May, after some unexpected and startling health concerns requiring an emergency room visit, my fiancé came clean to me about secretly canceling his health insurance in January without talking to or telling me. When I asked him why, he blamed the cost of the wedding being too expensive and wanting to save the $150 a month, taking no other accountability for his actions outside of an apology. I have a small amount of experience in accounting and have budgeted the wedding down to the last dollar. This has included the consideration of inflation and other potentials as well. In total, from the smallest decoration to the cost of a marriage certificate, everything comes down to around $22,000, all of which I have strategically budgeted for throughout our 2-year engagement. My parents have graciously given us $14,000 as well to help with the expenses, and I have personally taken on the price of my dress, wedding bands, and a slightly larger portion of the vendors. To put it simply, while it may not be as much as others, we have privilege. Not only was there no need for this cancellation, but I have yet to see any of that additional support for expenses. Regardless, in response, I took it upon myself to take more of the costs on and pursue a part-time job on top of my full-time position that earns roughly $70,000 a year. While it's not by a large margin, I do make the most between us individually and have a larger responsibility in my daily work life with longer hours and a significant level of expected travel as a result. The choice to take on a part-time role was not one of want, but of desire to ease the burden he was feeling. I started a role reviewing blogs, essays, resumes, and other forms of writing in July, and our relationship quickly unraveled. Because I commute, I typically arrive home 3 hours after my fiancé. After arriving, I would immediately have to hop on my laptop and review writings for the next 2 hours or so to stay on top of my quota. I tried my best to make a routine out of it, so we would have intentional time together once I finished each night. This was met with cold shouldering, frustration, and a lack of consideration for my level of exhaustion and strain for months. Anytime I asked him to choose a show to watch or decide on dinner, he usually does cook because I get home so much later while I revised. I was met with scoffs and accusations that I no longer cared to tend to our relationship. I tried countless times to address his frustrations and was shut out or cornered in a circular argument about my priorities. 2 weeks ago, I was slated to travel for my full-time position to Atlanta during Hurricane Helene. In a matter of 12 hours, my afternoon flight for the next day was shifted to 1, leaving at 5 a.m., to give me ample time to shelter in place prior to the arrival of the storm. I rushed home to finish packing and prepare myself to drive over an hour to the airport and stay at a hotel nearby for additional flexibility in case of issues surrounding my early travel that next morning. After arriving home, I immediately hopped in the shower and asked my fiancé to order dinner so we could have one final meal together. During my shower, he offered to order a hot honey, jalapeno, and pineapple pizza from a new place we'd been wanting to try, which I normally would have been happy to try. However, I don't like jalapeno the way some people don't like cilantro, and am avidly against pineapple on pizza, something that's come up multiple times during our relationship. And while I'm good with spice, the idea of taking that on with the travel stress and early start time I had the next day made me hesitant. I calmly asked if there was another option for tonight and if we could try that specific pizza once I got home instead, expressing my concerns over my nerves, which received a frustrated scoff and sarcastic response of, "What then? Just cheese?" I explained any other topping combination would work and restated my issues. He walked out of the bathroom without response, and I finished my shower. The pizza was never ordered, no food was ordered. I followed up as soon as I got out of the shower, asking if there was another option he wanted or a place he wanted to consider, and received a prompt no. As I finished getting ready, I asked if anything had been ordered again, and no. I finally snapped and begged and demanded him to order the hot honey pizza because I was out of time. He accused me of making him feel like he's forcing me into the decision, but after a bit of back and forth, the pizza was ordered and the mood immediately shifted. Everything was peaceful, warm, and loving at home up until I left. Yet I cried the entire hour and 15-minute drive to the airport hotel. I cried the entire next day, throughout the storm in Atlanta, and the entire day after. Following a lack of sleep, stress, and intense emotions, I had a complete mental breakdown, realizing I can't live like this. I called my fiancé and poured out every frustration, emotion, and feeling, which I admit was probably not presented in the best light, but none of it was well received. In the 2 weeks since, despite many attempts, conversations have gone nowhere, with only ultimatums being offered for me to make. I've proposed countless alternatives that focus on us working on ourselves and together these next few months. But he is only seeking an answer to whether or not we will be getting married next summer, and has made it known this is a decision that must be made by the end of October. At this point, I don't see how I can possibly gain the confidence to commit myself to him by next summer. For the sake of not doubling the length of this post, I will leave it at this for now. All of this is being discussed with my therapist. At this time, he has chosen not to pursue counseling with me, despite my asking and advocating. Many words have been expressed, and I am trying. But I'm starting to second guess and waver on just how far love can get me through all of this.